Hello and welcome to another edition of History of Journalism Online. I'm Professor Harper, and today we're going to talk briefly about the partisan press, which basically is the United States press during the Revolutionary War. It was not objective, it was not fair, it was not balanced, but it was effective. So one of the main leaders of the revolution, Sam Adams, was one of the leading journalists during the period, and he, for the most part, made stuff up. He wrote for the Boston Gazette, and his articles were reprinted in other papers. In 1964, he argued that Parliament was imposing too many taxes on the colonies. In 1968, he created the Journal of Occurrences as the first American news service, and many of the items were simply untrue. He said that British soldiers were raping American women, and he basically used his news service as a propaganda tool, which was a very effective one. One of the most important journalists, analysts, was Tom Paine, who was born in England and died in the United States. He essentially met Benjamin Franklin in London and arrived in Philadelphia in November of 1774. And he worked for Pennsylvania Magazine, which was Benjamin Franklin's magazine. Common Sense was a critical essay in justifying and analyzing the purpose of the revolution. It was a 50-page pamphlet that sold more than 500,000 copies, which was roughly 20% of the population in the Americas at the time, and it provided the basis for the Declaration of Independence. So, here's kind of the background of why common sense was necessary and what the facts on the ground were. That most columnists really wanted rights as English subjects. And Paine argued that the rights should be much broader. He said, quote, "The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind." And he argued for independence from Britain rather than simply extending the rights as British subjects to the colonies. He said that a society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state an intolerable one. So a change from the notion of a monarchy to a democratic republic or a representative republic. He said that the monarchy was wrong. He ridiculed the composition. He said it first excludes a man from the means of information, but it empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. The very nature of the king shuts him from the world, yet the business of a king requires him to know it thoroughly, so that a government by an isolated king was not a good one for the people. In Common Sense, Paine also talked about the relationship with Britain, and he said, "I challenge the warmest advocate for reconciliation to show a single advantage that this continent can reap by being connected with Great Britain. Our corn will fetch its price in any market in Europe. Our imported goods must be paid for what we buy them. The injuries and disadvantages outweigh any benefits that accrue by being a colony of Britain." Paine also talked about the formation of a U.S. government, and here you see the beginnings of the background for a Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson. "A government of our own is a natural right, and when a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own in a cool, deliberate manner, while we have it in our power, than to trust such an interesting event to time and chance." So laying the foundation and the basis for the Declaration of Independence, and then later the Constitution, which put meat on the bones of the government. Thomas Paine wrote 16 crisis papers that were issued in the Pennsylvania Journal between 1776 and 1783, and these were essentially to encourage people. The most famous one is "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered." In his final days, Paine was famous throughout the United States, but he really fell on hard times. He became too radical. In 1789, he left for Europe. In 1791, he published The Rights of Man, which was a defense of the French Revolution and an analysis of the discontent in European society and a remedy for the ills of and evils of arbitrary government. As you may know from previous studies, the French Revolution was a bloody revolution. It basically tore apart France, and while ultimately democracy came out of the French Revolution, it was a dreadful event in the history of Europe, and went far too much in the way of tearing things apart before building them up. The impact of Thomas Paine: he helped launch the American Revolution, but he's seen as too radical. In 1792, he was convicted of libel for The Rights of Man. He was denounced as a blasphemer in a lecture, and his hometown in England would not erect a statue until 1959. And Teddy Roosevelt referred to him as a filthy little atheist. So the partisan press, particularly Sam Adams, Tom Paine, were critical in launching the American Revolution. Sam Adams was able to protect his name, Tom Paine less so, but both important in this period where the press was essentially a propaganda tool and had nothing to do with objectivity, fairness, and balance, which really don't come into play until about the 1950s. But we'll take a look at those issues as we move along. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you online.